The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corridors of Clarence House as Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, approached the familiar mahogany doors that led to the private wing. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floors, each step echoing through the vast hallways lined with centuries-old portraits of royals past. She carried herself with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to navigate the complex world of royal protocols. Yet today, something felt different in the air. The private wing had always been her sanctuary, within the residence she shared with Charles. It was where she conducted her most personal correspondence, held intimate meetings with her closest advisors, and retreated when the weight of public scrutiny became too heavy. The rooms held her personal belongings, family photographs, and the comfortable chairs where she would curl up with a good book and a cup of tea on quiet afternoons. As she reached the ornate doors, Camilla noticed something unusual. Standing at attention beside the entrance was a guard she didn't immediately recognize. Tall and imposing, with the crisp uniform of the Royal Protection Command, he stood with military precision. His face was stern, almost mask-like, and his eyes remained fixed straight ahead as she approached. "Good morning," Camilla said pleasantly, reaching for the door handle as she had done countless times before. The motion was so automatic that she barely registered it until the guard stepped forward, blocking her path with a subtle but unmistakable movement. "Your Royal Highness," the guard said, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone delivering official orders, "I'm afraid I cannot permit entry to the private wing at this time." Camilla stopped mid-stride, her hand frozen inches from the door handle. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, creating a tension that was almost palpable. She looked at the guard more carefully, noting the name badge that read Thompson and the insignia that marked him as a senior protection officer. "I beg your pardon?" she asked, her voice maintaining its composure despite the confusion that was beginning to cloud her features. "I believe there must be some misunderstanding. These are my private quarters." Thompson's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. "I understand your confusion, Your Royal Highness, but my orders are quite clear. No one is to enter the private wing without express authorization." The Duchess felt a flush of irritation rising in her chest. Throughout her years as a member of the royal family, she had grown accustomed to the elaborate protocols and security measures that governed their daily lives. However, being denied access to her own private quarters was unprecedented and deeply troubling. "And who, may I ask, issued these orders?" Camilla inquired, her tone taking on a sharper edge. She drew herself up to her full height, unconsciously adopting the authoritative posture that years of royal training had ingrained in her. Thompson hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Camilla to notice. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of reluctance mixed with duty. "The orders come directly from the Prince of Wales, Your Royal Highness." The revelation hit Camilla like a physical blow. Charles had issued orders to prevent her from entering her own private wing? The thought seemed so absurd that she wondered if this was some elaborate practical joke or a test of some kind. But the guard's serious demeanor and the formal way he delivered the message left no room for such hopeful interpretations. "The Prince of Wales?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. The orders were delivered this morning through the proper channels. I have them in writing if you would like to see them." Camilla's mind raced as she tried to process this information. When had Charles left that morning? She remembered him mentioning something about early meetings, but the details were hazy. They had shared breakfast together, and their conversation had been pleasant enough, focusing on their upcoming engagements and a charity event they were both scheduled to attend the following week. "When exactly were these orders issued?" she asked, her voice regaining some of its strength. "At approximately 7:30 this morning, Your Royal Highness. They were delivered by the Prince's private secretary, along with instructions for immediate implementation." 7:30. That would have been just after Charles had left for his morning appointments. Camilla tried to recall any signs of tension or unusual behavior from her husband, but nothing stood out. If anything, he had seemed more relaxed than usual, even making jokes about the weather and commenting positively on the breakfast prepared by their chef. "I see," she said slowly, though, in truth, she saw nothing clearly at all. The situation was becoming more bewildering by the moment. "And how long are these restrictions expected to remain in place?" The orders indicate indefinitely, ma'am, pending further instruction from the Prince of Wales. The word indefinitely seemed to echo in Camilla's mind. This wasn't a temporary security measure or a brief inconvenience related to some official function. This was a deliberate and sustained exclusion from her own private space, ordered by the man who was supposed to be her closest ally and partner. She stood there for several moments, staring at the familiar doors that had suddenly become as impenetrable as a fortress wall. The golden handles that she had turned so many times before now seemed to mock her with their proximity and inaccessibility. Behind those doors lay her personal sanctuary, and suddenly it felt as though a part of her identity had been stripped away. "Is there anything else I can help you with, Your Royal Highness?" Thompson asked, his tone suggesting a desire to maintain professional courtesy despite the uncomfortable nature of his assignment. Camilla realized that she had been standing there in silence, lost in her thoughts. She looked at the guard again, noting the way he seemed to avoid making direct eye contact. This situation was clearly as uncomfortable for him as it was for her, perhaps more so. Guards were trained to protect the royal family, not to exclude them from their own homes. "No, thank you," she replied, summoning what remained of her composure. "I believe I understand the situation clearly enough." But even as she spoke the words, Camilla knew that understanding was the last thing she possessed. The morning had taken a surreal turn that seemed to belong more to a nightmare than to reality. As she turned away from the doors, her mind was already working to piece together the possible reasons behind Charles's unprecedented decision. The walk back through the corridors felt different now. The same portraits that had welcomed her just minutes before now seemed to watch her with judging eyes. The familiar grandeur of the residence felt somehow foreign, as if she was seeing it for the first time, or perhaps as if she no longer belonged there. When she reached her sitting room in the main part of the house, Camilla closed the door behind her and leaned against it for support. The room suddenly felt cramped and confining compared to the spacious privacy of her usual quarters. She moved to the window and looked out at the gardens, where gardeners were tending to the rose bushes that Charles was so fond of. Everything appeared normal from this vantage point, yet nothing felt normal anymore. She considered calling Charles immediately but hesitated. If he had gone to the trouble of issuing formal orders to restrict her access, there must be a significant reason behind it. Perhaps it was related to security concerns she wasn't aware of, or maybe there was some official protocol that required temporary restrictions. But even as she considered these possibilities, they felt weak and unconvincing. The more she thought about it, the more questions arose. Why hadn't Charles discussed this with her beforehand? Why had he chosen to communicate through official orders rather than a direct conversation? And most troubling of all, why did the orders specify indefinitely rather than a specific time frame? Camilla found herself pacing the sitting room, her mind churning with possibilities and theories. Perhaps there had been a security threat that required immediate action. Maybe there was some kind of investigation taking place that she needed to be protected from. Or could it be related to some political situation that she wasn't aware of? But none of these explanations felt satisfactory. In all their years together, Charles had never excluded her from important decisions or kept her in the dark about matters that affected their shared living space. Their relationship had been built on communication and mutual respect, even when they disagreed about various issues. The sound of her phone ringing interrupted her troubled thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw that it was her private secretary, Miranda, calling about the day's schedule. For a moment, Camilla considered ignoring the call, but professional duty won out over personal turmoil. "Good morning, Miranda," she answered, working to keep her voice steady and normal. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness. I wanted to confirm the details for this afternoon's engagement at the Children's Hospital. The car is scheduled to collect you at 2 o'clock. And the visit should last approximately 90 minutes. The mention of the hospital visit brought Camilla back to the reality of her royal duties. Regardless of whatever personal crisis was unfolding at home, there were responsibilities that could not be postponed or canceled. Children were waiting to meet her, and their excitement and joy would not be diminished by her domestic troubles. "Yes, that sounds fine," Camilla replied. "Please ensure that the gifts we selected are loaded into the car. I want to make certain each child receives something special." "Of course, ma'am. Is there anything else you need me to arrange for today?" Camilla paused, considering whether to mention the morning's events to Miranda. Her private secretary had been with her for several years and had proven herself to be both discreet and capable of handling unusual situations. However, something held Camilla back. The incident with the guard felt too personal and too potentially explosive to share with anyone until she better understood what was happening. "No thank you, Miranda. I'll see you this afternoon." After ending the call, Camilla returned to the window and watched the gardeners continue their work. Their movements were methodical and purposeful, each action serving a clear function in maintaining the beauty of the grounds. She envied their clarity of purpose and the straightforward nature of their work. The morning sun had climbed higher now, and the shadows in the garden were shorter and sharper. Camilla realized that she had been standing at the window for nearly an hour, lost in her thoughts and growing increasingly frustrated with her inability to make sense of the situation. She decided that waiting for Charles to return from his meetings was not an option. Whatever was behind his decision to restrict her access to the private wing, she needed answers, and she needed them sooner rather than later. The uncertainty was becoming more unbearable with each passing minute. Camilla moved to her desk and pulled out her personal phone, scrolling through the contacts until she found Charles's private number. Her finger hovered over the call button for several seconds as she considered what she would say. Should she demand an immediate explanation? Should she express hurt and confusion? Should she approach the situation with anger or with concern? Before she could make the call, however, she heard a soft knock at the sitting room door. "Come in," she called, quickly putting the phone aside. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, carrying a tea service on a silver tray. The elderly woman had been with the household for more than 2 decades and possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when members of the royal family were troubled. "I thought you might like some tea, Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Patterson said as she set the tray down on the coffee table. "Earl Grey? Just as you prefer it." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That's very thoughtful." The housekeeper began arranging the tea service with practiced efficiency, but Camilla could sense that there was something else on her mind. After years of working together, they had developed a comfortable relationship that allowed for a certain degree of informal communication. "Is everything quite all right, ma'am?" Mrs. Patterson asked as she poured the tea. "You seem a bit unsettled this morning." Camilla accepted the cup of tea gratefully, using the moment to consider her response. Mrs. Patterson's question was innocuous enough, but there was something in her tone that suggested she might already know about the morning's events. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the household today?" Camilla asked, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Dunsolve." Patterson's pause was almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Well, ma'am, there has been some additional security presence in certain areas of the residence. Nothing that affects the normal operations, of course, but the staff has been asked to avoid the private wing for the time being. So the restrictions extended beyond just Camilla herself. The entire household staff had been instructed to stay away from the private wing." This revelation added another layer of mystery to an already confusing situation. "I see," Camilla said, taking a sip of her tea. "Did these instructions come through the normal channels?" "Yes, ma'am. Through the prince's office this morning." Very official and precise, as these things usually are. The confirmation that Charles's office had issued the orders made the situation feel even more real and serious. This wasn't the result of miscommunication or unauthorized actions by overzealous security personnel. This was a deliberate decision made at the highest level of their household hierarchy. "Mrs. Patterson," Camilla said carefully, "in your years of service here, have you ever encountered anything quite like this before?" The housekeeper considered the question thoughtfully. "Nothing quite like this, no ma'am. There have been security restrictions from time to time, usually related to official visits or special events, but nothing that affected the family's access to their own private quarters." Camilla nodded, feeling both vindicated in her confusion and increasingly worried about what might be behind such unprecedented measures. If even Mrs. Patterson, with her decades of experience in royal households, found the situation unusual, then Camilla's concerns were clearly justified. "Thank you for the tea," Camilla said, "and for your discretion regarding this matter." "Of course, Your Royal Highness. If there's anything else you need, please don't hesitate to call." After Mrs. Patterson left, Camilla found herself alone with her thoughts once again. The tea helped steady her nerves somewhat, but it did nothing to answer the questions that continued to multiply in her mind. She realized that she could not continue to wait passively for answers that might never come voluntarily. The decision to confront Charles directly crystallized in her mind. Whatever his reasons for issuing the orders, she deserved an explanation, and she deserved it immediately. Their marriage and their partnership in royal duties were built on foundations of trust and communication that could not survive this kind of unilateral action without serious consequences. Camilla picked up her phone again and this time did not hesitate to place the call. As the phone rang, she prepared herself for what might be a difficult conversation, but she was determined to get to the bottom of the morning's mysterious events. The phone continued to ring, and with each unanswered tone, Camilla's resolve grew stronger. Whatever was behind Charles's decision to lock her out of her own private wing, she would not be deterred from seeking answers. The morning had begun with confusion and hurt, but it would not end without clarity, regardless of how uncomfortable that clarity might prove to be. As she waited for Charles to answer, Camilla looked once more toward the private wing, knowing that behind those locked doors lay not just her personal belongings, but potentially the answers to questions that could reshape her understanding of her marriage and her place within the royal family. Charles's phone went straight to voicemail after 5 rings, his familiar recorded voice politely explaining that he was unavailable and would return calls as soon as possible. Camilla stared at her phone screen in frustration, the small device suddenly feeling heavy in her hands. The formal tone of his voicemail message, which she had heard countless times before, now seemed cold and distant. She considered leaving a message but found herself uncertain about what exactly to say. How does one leave a voicemail asking why they've been locked out of their own home by their husband? The very thought seemed absurd, yet here she was, living through precisely that scenario. Instead of leaving a message, Camilla decided to try a different approach. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for James Hartwell, Charles's private secretary. If anyone would know the reasoning behind the morning's orders, it would be James. He had worked for Charles for nearly 15 years and was privy to even the most sensitive matters concerning the prince's personal and official affairs. The phone was answered on the second ring. James Hartwell speaking. James, it's Camilla. I need to speak with you about something rather urgent. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Camilla could almost hear James's mind working. As Charles's private secretary, he was undoubtedly aware of the orders that had been issued that morning. Of course, Your Royal Highness. How may I assist you? I think you know why I'm calling, James. I was denied access to my private wing this morning by a security guard who claimed to be acting on orders from Charles. I need to understand what's happening. Another pause, longer this time. When James spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of someone navigating treacherous diplomatic waters. I understand your concern, ma'am. The orders were indeed issued this morning through proper channels. That's not what I'm asking, James. I want to know why these orders were issued. What possible reason could there be for preventing me from entering my own private quarters? I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific reasoning behind His Royal Highness's decisions. Perhaps it would be best if you spoke with the prince directly about this matter. Camilla felt her patience beginning to fray. James's diplomatic non-answers were only adding to her frustration and growing sense of alienation. I've tried calling Charles. He's not answering. And frankly, James, I find it rather extraordinary that such a significant decision affecting my daily life would be made without any consultation or advance notice. I understand your position entirely, ma'am. However, my instructions were quite clear regarding the confidentiality of this matter. The word confidentiality sent a chill through Camilla. What could possibly require such secrecy that it would necessitate locking her out of her own home? Her mind began to race through increasingly dark possibilities. Was there some kind of security threat directed specifically at her? Had she unknowingly become involved in something dangerous? James, she said, her voice taking on a more urgent tone, I need you to understand something. I am not just asking out of curiosity or wounded pride. I am genuinely concerned that something serious may be happening, and I deserve to know if my safety or well-being is at stake. She heard James sigh softly on the other end of the line. Your Royal Highness, I can assure you that your safety is not in immediate danger. Beyond that, I really must insist that you speak with the Prince of Wales directly. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving Camilla with more questions than answers. James's assurance about her safety was somewhat comforting, but it also raised new concerns. If this wasn't about immediate physical danger, what could it be about? What circumstances would require such dramatic and secretive action? Camilla found herself pacing her sitting room again, her mind working through various scenarios. Perhaps Charles had discovered something about her past that troubled him, though she couldn't imagine what that might be. Their relationship had been built on honesty from the beginning, and she had been open about her life before they married. Or perhaps this was related to some political situation that she wasn't aware of. The royal family was often caught in the crossfire of political tensions, and maybe Charles was trying to protect her from some brewing controversy. But that didn't explain why he would handle it in such a secretive and isolating manner. The more she considered the possibilities, the more troubled she became. In all their years together, Charles had never been secretive or manipulative. Even during their most difficult periods, he had been direct and honest with her. This sudden change in behavior was completely out of character and deeply unsettling. A soft knock at the door interrupted her troubled thoughts. "Come in," she called, hoping for some distraction from her spiraling anxiety. To her surprise, it was Thompson, the guard who had denied her entry to the private wing. He looked somewhat uncomfortable as he stood at attention just inside the doorway. "Your Royal Highness, I wanted to speak with you privately, if I may." Camilla studied his face, noting the conflict in his expression. "Of course, Thompson. Please, come in and close the door." He did as she asked, then stood uncertainly for a moment before speaking. "Ma'am, I want you to know that executing those orders this morning was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my career. It goes against every instinct I have as a protection officer." His honesty was unexpected and strangely comforting. "I appreciate your candor, Thompson. Can you tell me anything about the circumstances surrounding these orders?" Thompson glanced toward the door, as if making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "I can tell you that the orders came through unusual channels, ma'am. Normally, security changes affecting family members go through the head of royal protection. These came directly from the prince's office, with instructions for immediate implementation and absolute confidentiality. This information added another piece to the puzzle. If Charles had bypassed normal security protocols, it suggested that whatever was happening was both urgent and highly sensitive. But it also raised questions about whether other members of the royal protection team were aware of the situation. Have you been given any indication of how long these restrictions might remain in place?" Camilla asked. "No specific time frame, ma'am. The orders simply state until further notice. But I can tell you that additional security measures have been put in place throughout the residence. It's clear that this is being treated as a significant situation." Camilla felt a growing sense of unease. Additional security measures suggested that whatever was happening was considered serious enough to warrant extraordinary precautions. Yet she remained completely in the dark about the nature of the threat or problem that required such drastic action. "Thompson, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you believe I am in some kind of danger?" The guard considered her question carefully. "Ma'am, I don't believe you are in immediate physical danger. However, I think it's clear that something significant is happening that requires careful management. Beyond that, I'm afraid I don't have enough information to offer any meaningful assessment." His response was both reassuring and frustrating. At least she wasn't in immediate danger, but the continued mystery surrounding the situation was becoming increasingly unbearable. "Thank you for your honesty, Thompson. I know this puts you in a difficult position. Ma'am, if I may say so, I hope this situation is resolved quickly. It's clear that these arrangements are causing you distress, and that troubles all of us who are charged with your protection and well-being." After Thompson left, Camilla found herself feeling slightly more grounded. His willingness to share what little information he could provided some comfort, even if it didn't answer her fundamental questions. At least she now knew that the situation was being taken seriously by the security team and that her distress was being noted by those around her. But the clock was ticking, and she still had her afternoon engagement at the children's hospital to consider. The thought of going through the motions of a public appearance while her personal life was in such turmoil seemed almost impossible. Yet canceling would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer and would potentially disappoint children who had been looking forward to her visit. Camilla decided she needed to try Charles's phone once more before making any decisions about the afternoon schedule. This time, when the call went to voicemail, she chose to leave a message. "Charles, it's Camilla. I need to speak with you immediately about the situation at home. I've been denied access to my private wing, and no one will explain why. This is completely unacceptable, and I need answers before I can continue with my scheduled engagements. Please call me as soon as you receive this message." She ended the call and immediately felt better for having been direct about her frustration. Whether Charles would respond quickly remained to be seen, but at least he would know that she was not prepared to accept the current situation without explanation. The minutes ticked by slowly, as Camilla waited for some response to her message. She tried to occupy herself with correspondence but found it impossible to concentrate on routine matters while such a significant crisis remained unresolved. Every few minutes, she would check her phone, hoping for a callback that never came. At noon, Miranda called to confirm the afternoon schedule. "The car will be ready at 2 o'clock, Your Royal Highness. The hospital staff are very excited about your visit, and the children have prepared some artwork to show you." Camilla felt torn between her professional obligations and her personal crisis. The children at the hospital deserved her full attention and enthusiasm, but she wasn't certain she could provide that while her mind was consumed with questions about her husband's inexplicable behavior. "Miranda, I need to ask you something confidentially. If it became necessary to postpone this afternoon's engagement, what would be the implications?" There was surprise in Miranda's voice when she responded. "Well, ma'am, it would certainly be disappointing for the hospital staff and the children. They've been preparing for weeks. Is there some concern about the engagement?" Camilla realized that she couldn't explain her hesitation without revealing the morning's events, something she wasn't prepared to do. "No concerns about the engagement itself. I was simply thinking through various scenarios. Please proceed with the arrangements as planned." After ending the call with Miranda, Camilla made a decision that surprised even herself. If Charles was going to treat her as an outsider in her own home, she would begin acting like one. Instead of waiting passively for explanations that might never come, she would start conducting her own investigation. She began by making a mental list of everyone who might have insight into Charles's recent state of mind, or any unusual circumstances that might have prompted such drastic action. His closest advisors, family members, and longtime staff members all became potential sources of information. Her first call was to Lady Susan Blackwood, Charles's cousin and one of his most trusted confidants. Susan had known Charles since childhood and was often privy to his thoughts and concerns before major decisions. "Susan, it's Camilla. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, my dear." "How are you?" "Actually, I'm calling because I'm concerned about Charles. Has he mentioned anything to you recently about unusual security concerns or personal matters that might be troubling him?" There was a pause before Susan responded. "No, nothing specific comes to mind. Although, now that you mention it, he did seem rather preoccupied when I spoke with him earlier this week. I assumed it was just the usual pressures of his schedule. Is something wrong?" Camilla considered how much to reveal. "I'm just trying to understand if there's been anything weighing on his mind lately. Sometimes these things are easier to see from the outside." "Well, he did mention something about needing to make some difficult decisions regarding household arrangements, but he didn't elaborate. You know how Charles can be when he's working through complex problems. He tends to internalize everything until he's ready to discuss it." The mention of household arrangements sent a jolt through Camilla. Could Susan be referring to the very situation she was currently experiencing? If so, it suggested that Charles had been planning this action for some time, which made his failure to discuss it with her even more troubling. "Did he give any indication of what kind of household arrangements?" Camilla asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "No specifics, I'm afraid. He just seemed to be wrestling with some kind of decision that he found particularly challenging. You know better than anyone how much he hates making choices that might cause discomfort to the people he cares about." This last comment struck Camilla as particularly ironic, given her current circumstances. If Charles was concerned about causing discomfort, his current approach was certainly not reflecting that consideration. "Susan, if Charles does confide in you about anything unusual, would you mind encouraging him to discuss it with me directly? I'm concerned that he might be trying to handle something on his own that would be better addressed together." "Of course, dear. Though you know Charles as well as anyone. When he sets his mind to handling something independently, it can be quite difficult to change his approach. The conversation with Susan provided some useful context, but raised as many questions as it answered. The fact that Charles had apparently been contemplating household changes for some time suggested this wasn't a sudden reaction to an immediate crisis. But it also meant that he had been keeping significant plans from her for an extended period. As the afternoon approached and she prepared for the hospital visit, Camilla found herself in an increasingly surreal situation. She would spend the next few hours smiling, chatting with children, and fulfilling her royal duties while simultaneously being locked out of her own home by her husband. The disconnect between her public and private realities was becoming almost impossible to manage, yet she knew she had no choice but to compartmentalize her personal crisis and fulfill her professional obligations. The children at the hospital were innocent parties who deserved her full attention regardless of the chaos in her personal life. She would summon every ounce of her training and experience to ensure they received the royal visit they had been promised. But as soon as the hospital engagement was concluded, Camilla was determined to get answers, even if it meant confronting Charles in person at his office or wherever else she might find him. The time for passive waiting and polite inquiries had passed. She needed the truth, and she needed it immediately. The children's hospital visit proved to be both a blessing and a torment. Walking through the colorful corridors lined with artwork and inspirational messages, Camilla found herself genuinely moved by the courage and resilience of the young patients she met. 8-year-old Emma showed her a painting of a rainbow, with the words "Hope lives here" written in careful, childish letters across the bottom. 10-year-old Marcus, despite being confined to a wheelchair, regaled her with jokes that had her laughing despite the turmoil in her personal life. Yet even as she smiled and chatted with the children, part of her mind remained consumed by the morning's events. When little Sophie, a 6-year-old with bright eyes and a surgical bandage covering half her head, asked if she lived in a real castle, Camilla found herself hesitating. Did she live in a castle if she could be locked out of her own rooms at her husband's whim? "I live in a very big house with my husband," she replied carefully. "But what makes any place special is the people who live there and love each other." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. How could she talk about love and family when her own marriage seemed to be unraveling in ways she couldn't understand? Dr. Margaret Chen, the hospital's chief pediatric surgeon, accompanied Camilla through most of the visit. During a quiet moment between patient visits, she commented on Camilla's obvious connection with the children. "Your Royal Highness, the children always respond so positively to your visits. You have a natural ability to make them feel valued and heard." "They're remarkable young people," Camilla replied genuinely. "Their strength in the face of such challenges is truly inspiring. If I may say so, you seem a bit subdued today. I hope everything is well." Dr. Chen's observation was perceptive and concerning. If her distraction was visible to someone she had just met, how would she manage upcoming public engagements? The royal family's effectiveness depended on their ability to maintain public confidence, and personal problems that affected their professional performance could have far-reaching consequences. "Just a busy time," Camilla deflected. But these children certainly helped put things in perspective. The visit concluded with a group photo in the hospital's main lobby. As camera flashes illuminated her smile, Camilla couldn't help but think about how photographs could capture an image while revealing nothing about the reality behind it. To anyone looking at these pictures, she would appear to be the epitome of royal grace and contentment. The truth of her current situation would remain hidden behind the carefully constructed facade. During the drive back to Clarence House, Camilla checked her phone repeatedly for messages from Charles. Each time she looked at the blank screen, her frustration and worry grew. His continued silence was becoming as troubling as the original incident with the guard. In all their years together, even during their most difficult periods, Charles had never simply ignored her attempts to communicate. As the car pulled through the gates of Clarence House, Camilla felt an unexpected sense of dread. The residence that had been her sanctuary for so many years now felt like hostile territory. She wondered if the guard would still be stationed at her private wing, a constant reminder of her unexpected exile from her own home. Miranda was waiting in the main entrance hall with a stack of correspondence and the next day's schedule. Her efficient demeanor was a comforting constant in an increasingly unstable day. "How did the hospital visit go, Your Royal Highness?" "Very well. The children were wonderful. as always. Dr. Chen mentioned wanting to discuss expanding the arts therapy program. Please make a note to follow up with her office next week. Of course, ma'am. Also, there have been several calls for you this afternoon. Nothing urgent, but I have the messages prepared for your review. Camilla accepted the stack of papers knowing she would struggle to focus on routine correspondence while her personal life remained in chaos. Miranda, has there been any word from the Prince of Wales this afternoon? Not that I'm aware of, ma'am. His office did call to confirm tomorrow's joint engagement at the museum opening, but that was purely logistical. The mention of a joint engagement the following day struck Camilla as particularly surreal. How could they appear together publicly when Charles was apparently refusing to even take her phone calls? The cognitive dissonance of maintaining their professional partnership, while their personal relationship seemed to be fracturing, was becoming overwhelming. Thank you, Miranda. I'll review these later this evening. After Miranda departed, Camilla found herself alone in the grand entrance hall. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the marble floor, and the familiar portraits seemed to watch her with expressions she had never noticed before. For the first time since making this place her home, she felt truly unwelcome in the residence. She decided to venture toward the private wing once more, driven by a combination of hope and defiance. Perhaps the guard had been recalled, or perhaps Charles had returned and countermanded his earlier orders. But as she approached the familiar corridor, she could see Thompson still stationed at his post. He straightened as she approached, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes showing what appeared to be sympathy. Any change in the situation, Thompson? No, ma'am. The orders remain in effect. Camilla stared at the door, so close yet completely inaccessible. Behind that barrier lay not just her personal belongings, but also her private office where she conducted sensitive correspondence, her personal safe containing family heirlooms, and the photographs and mementos that made the space truly hers. Thompson, I need to ask you something, and I hope you can give me an honest answer. In your professional opinion, what kind of situation would require such extraordinary security measures? The guard considered her question carefully. Ma'am, in my experience, this type of immediate and comprehensive restriction typically indicates either an imminent security threat or the need to preserve potential evidence related to an ongoing investigation. The word evidence sent a chill through Camilla. Evidence of what? What could possibly be in her private quarters that would require investigation? She had always been meticulous about maintaining appropriate boundaries between her personal affairs and her royal duties. Her correspondence was proper. Her financial arrangements were transparent, and she had never been involved in anything that could be considered compromising. Thank you for your honesty, she said quietly. Ma'am, if I may, I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I've never seen a situation quite like this one. Whatever is happening, I believe it will be resolved soon. These kinds of arrangements simply aren't sustainable long-term. His attempt at reassurance was appreciated, but it also highlighted how unprecedented her situation had become. Even experienced security professionals were puzzled by Charles's actions. As she walked back toward the main part of the residence, Camilla's phone finally rang. Her heart leaped as she saw Charles's name on the screen. Charles, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. Camilla, I received your messages. I'm sorry I couldn't call back sooner. His voice sounded strained and distant, lacking the warmth and familiarity she was accustomed to. There was something formal and careful in his tone that immediately put her on edge. Charles, what is going on? Why have I been locked out of my private wing? Why are there guards preventing me from accessing my own quarters? There was a long pause before he responded. It's complicated, Camilla. I can't discuss the details over the phone. Can't discuss them? Charles, these are my living quarters we're talking about. I think I have a right to understand why I've been excluded from my own home. I understand your frustration, but there are factors at play that you're not aware of. I need you to trust me that this is necessary. Trust him? The request seemed almost laughable given the circumstances. How could she trust someone who would take such drastic action without consultation or explanation? Charles, I don't understand how you can ask me to trust you when you've made a decision that fundamentally affects my daily life without even discussing it with me. This isn't how we handle things. This isn't how our marriage works. I know this is difficult, but I need you to be patient while certain matters are being addressed. His continued vagueness was infuriating. What matters? What could possibly justify this kind of treatment? Charles, I feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare where nothing makes sense. Camilla, please. I know this is hard to understand, but I can't provide more details right now. I need you to trust that I'm acting in both of our best interests. Our best interests? How is isolating me in my own home in anyone's best interest? How is refusing to communicate with your wife in anyone's best interest? She could hear him sigh heavily on the other end of the line. Look, I'll be home late this evening. We can discuss this further then. We can discuss it now, Charles. There's no reason this conversation needs to wait. I'm afraid there is. I'll see you tonight, Camilla. The line went dead, leaving her staring at her phone in disbelief. The conversation had been more frustrating than illuminating, raising more questions than it answered. Charles's refusal to provide even basic information about his reasoning was completely out of character and deeply troubling. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of restless energy and growing anxiety. Camilla tried to focus on correspondence, but found herself reading the same paragraphs repeatedly without comprehension. She attempted to review the next day's schedule with Miranda, but kept losing track of the conversation mid-sentence. As evening approached, she found herself dreading Charles's return almost as much as she had been anticipating it. Their phone conversation had made it clear that he was not prepared to be forthcoming about his reasoning, and she feared that an in-person confrontation might be even more difficult and emotionally charged. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway of the sitting room as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the residence. "Your Royal Highness, will you be dining in tonight?" The chef would like to know if he should prepare for one or two. The question highlighted yet another aspect of the day's surreal quality. She didn't even know if Charles would be joining her for dinner, despite the fact that they lived in the same residence and had been married for years. "I believe the prince will be joining me, though I'm not certain of the timing. Please ask the chef to prepare for two, but to be flexible with the serving time." "Of course, ma'am. Will you be dining in the main dining room, or would you prefer something more intimate?" More intimate. The phrase seemed almost ironic given the current state of her marriage. How could anything be intimate when she was being excluded from half of her own home? "The smaller dining room, I think. And Mrs. Patterson, please ensure that we won't be disturbed during dinner. I believe the prince and I have some important matters to discuss." As the housekeeper departed, Camilla realized that she was dreading the upcoming conversation almost as much as she needed it. Whatever was behind Charles's behavior, she sensed that learning the truth might be more painful than continuing to live in uncertainty. The sound of car doors closing in the driveway announced Charles's arrival home. Camilla positioned herself in the main sitting room, where she would have a clear view of the entrance hall. She wanted to observe his demeanor and body language before they began what was certain to be a difficult conversation. When Charles entered the residence, she was struck by how tired and stressed he appeared. His usually impeccable posture was slightly slouched, and there were lines of tension around his eyes that she hadn't noticed that morning. Whatever was causing him to take such drastic action was clearly taking a toll on him as well. He paused when he saw her watching from the sitting room doorway. For a moment, their eyes met across the entrance hall, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart race. It wasn't anger or determination that she saw there, but rather something that looked disturbingly like guilt and regret. "Camilla," he said simply, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. "Charles, I think we need to talk." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "Yes, we do." As they walked together toward the smaller dining room, Camilla found herself studying her husband's profile. After all their years together, she thought she knew every expression, every gesture, every indication of his moods and thoughts. But the man walking beside her felt like a stranger, carrying secrets that threatened to unravel everything she thought she understood about their life together. The dining room had been set for two, with candles lit and the good china arranged on the polished mahogany table. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the perfect setting for an intimate dinner between husband and wife. Tonight, it felt more like a stage set for a confrontation that could change everything. As they took their seats across from each other, Camilla realized that whatever Charles was about to tell her would mark a turning point in their marriage. The morning had begun with confusion and hurt, but she sensed that it would end with revelations that would reshape her understanding of her husband, her marriage, and her place in the world they had built together. The weight of impending truth hung in the air between them like a storm cloud ready to break. Charles remained silent as the first course was served, his eyes focused on his plate rather than meeting Camilla's increasingly intense gaze. The dining room, usually filled with comfortable conversation about their daily activities and upcoming engagements, felt oppressively quiet. The only sounds were the gentle clink of silverware against china and the soft footsteps of the staff as they moved efficiently around the table. Camilla waited until they were alone before speaking. "Well, Charles, I've spent the entire day in a state of confusion and humiliation. I think I've been patient enough." He looked up at her then, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. There was something deeply troubled in his eyes, a weight that seemed to have aged him years since that morning. "Camilla, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. I need you to listen carefully and try to understand that everything I've done today has been to protect both of us." Her hands tightened around her wineglass. "Protect us from what?" Charles set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, as if gathering strength for what he needed to say. "This morning I received information from intelligence services that there has been a significant security breach involving your personal communications." The words hit her like a physical blow. "My communications? What do you mean?" "It appears that for several months, possibly longer, your private emails, text messages, and even some of your personal conversations have been monitored and recorded by unknown parties." Camilla felt the blood drain from her face. The implications of what he was saying were staggering. Monitored by whom and why? That's still being investigated. What we know is that the breach seems to be centered on your private office and personal computer systems. That's why access to your private wing has been restricted. Intelligence teams need to conduct a thorough investigation to determine the extent of the compromise and identify the source. She sat in stunned silence for several moments, her mind reeling. "Charles, are you saying that someone has been spying on me? Reading my personal correspondence? Listening to my private conversations?" "I'm afraid that appears to be the case. The invasion of privacy was horrifying enough, but the potential implications were even more terrifying. As a member of the royal family, her communications often contain sensitive information about state matters, family affairs, and confidential discussions with advisors and friends." "How long has this been going on? What kind of information might have been compromised?" Charles's expression grew even more troubled. "The intelligence services believe the breach may have been active for up to 8 months. As for what information was accessed, we simply don't know yet. That's what they're trying to determine." 8 months. Camilla tried to think back over the previous months, considering all the sensitive conversations she might have had, all the private correspondence she had sent and received. The potential damage was incalculable. "Why didn't you tell me about this immediately? Why did I have to find out by being humiliated in front of a security guard?" The intelligence services insisted on absolute secrecy while they conducted their initial assessment. They were concerned that if you knew about the investigation, it might alert whoever is responsible for the breach. "So you thought it was acceptable to let me believe that you had arbitrarily decided to lock me out of my own home. Do you have any idea what I've been thinking all day? Do you realize how that made me feel?" Charles reached across the table toward her, but she pulled her hands away. "Camilla, I know how difficult this must have been, but the security services were adamant that maintaining the cover story was essential to the investigation." "Cover story? Is that what our marriage has become, Charles? A cover story for intelligence operations? That's not fair. I was trying to balance my responsibility to protect you with my obligation to cooperate with a serious security investigation." Camilla stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "Protect me? You've spent the entire day lying to me, allowing me to believe that you had turned against me for reasons I couldn't understand. How is that protecting me? I couldn't tell you the truth without compromising the investigation. If whoever is responsible for this breach suspected that we were aware of it, they might have destroyed evidence or escalated their activities." She began pacing around the dining room, her mind racing through the implications of what she had learned. Who else knows about this? How many people have been keeping this secret from me? Only the most senior intelligence officials and my immediate staff. Even most of the security team doesn't know the real reason for the restrictions. including Thompson, the guard who had to look me in the eye this morning and deny me access to my own home. Yes, including Thompson, we felt it was necessary to maintain operational security. The revelation that even the security personnel had been kept in the dark about the true nature of the situation provided little comfort. If anything, it highlighted how isolated she had been in her ignorance of the crisis unfolding around her. Charles, I need to understand something. When you say my communications have been monitored, exactly what does that mean? Are we talking about someone reading my emails, or is it more extensive than that? His hesitation before answering told her everything she needed to know. The preliminary investigation suggests it may be quite comprehensive. Emails, text messages, possibly phone conversations, and even conversations that took place in your private office. The thought that her most intimate and private conversations had been recorded and monitored by unknown individuals was nauseating. She thought about all the personal discussions she had held in that space, the vulnerable moments, the private family matters that were never meant for outside ears. Do they have any idea who might be responsible? Is this industrial espionage, foreign intelligence, or something else? The investigation is still in its early stages. They're examining multiple possibilities, including state actors, criminal organizations, and even potential internal threats. Internal threats. The suggestion that someone within their own circle might be responsible for the breach added another layer of violation to an already devastating situation. Charles, I have to ask this directly. Do they suspect me of any wrongdoing? Is there any suggestion that I might have somehow facilitated this breach? Absolutely not. You are clearly the victim here, not a suspect. The relief she felt at his answer was immediate but short-lived. Even if she wasn't suspected of wrongdoing, the damage to her privacy and potentially to sensitive information was already done. What happens next? How long will this investigation take? When can I return to my normal life? The intelligence teams expect to complete their technical assessment within the next few days. However, the broader investigation into who is responsible and what information was compromised could take weeks or even months. The prospect of living in this state of uncertainty and restricted access for weeks was almost unbearable. And in the meantime, I'm supposed to continue with my public engagements and official duties while pretending that everything is normal? The intelligence services believe that maintaining normal routines is essential to avoid arousing suspicion. They want whoever is responsible to believe that their activities remain undetected. Camilla returned to her seat, feeling suddenly exhausted by the weight of what she had learned. Charles, do you realize what you're asking of me? You want me to smile and wave and chat with the public while knowing that my most private moments may have been violated and exposed? I know it's an enormous burden, and I'm sorry that circumstances have forced us to handle it this way. Forced us? You chose to handle it this way. You could have trusted me with the truth from the beginning. If I had told you this morning, would you have been able to go to the children's hospital this afternoon and give those young patients the attention and care they deserved? Would you have been able to maintain the facade that the intelligence services deemed necessary? His question gave her pause. The afternoon at the hospital had been challenging enough, with just the confusion and hurt of not knowing why she had been excluded from her private wing. If she had known the true reason, if she had understood that her privacy had been so thoroughly violated, she might indeed have been unable to function in her public role. That should have been my choice to make, Charles. I should have been given the opportunity to decide how to handle this information. You're right. In retrospect, I think I made the wrong decision. I was following the advice of the security services, but I should have insisted that you be informed immediately. His admission provided some validation for her feelings of betrayal, but it did little to undo the damage that had been done to her trust. The fact that he had chosen to follow the guidance of intelligence officials over his obligation to be honest with his wife revealed priorities that troubled her deeply. How do we move forward from here? How do I continue to live and work normally while knowing that my privacy has been so completely compromised? The technical teams are implementing enhanced security measures that should prevent any further breaches. And once they complete their investigation of your private quarters, you'll be able to return to normal use of those spaces. Enhanced security measures. Does that mean my communications will be monitored by our own security services going forward? Only to the extent necessary to detect any future unauthorized access. Your privacy will be respected by our own personnel. The irony of having her privacy protected by monitoring her communications was not lost on her. In trying to prevent unauthorized surveillance, they would be implementing authorized surveillance. The distinction might be meaningful from a security standpoint, but it felt like a hollow comfort. Charles, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Based on what the intelligence services have told you, how bad is this? What's the worst-case scenario for the damage that might have been done? He was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. The worst case is that sensitive information about royal family matters, government business, or personal affairs could be used to embarrass or compromise us. Depending on who is responsible, it could be used for blackmail, public embarrassment, or to undermine confidence in the monarchy. The full scope of the potential consequences was staggering. Not only had her personal privacy been violated, but the breach could potentially affect the entire royal family and even national security. Have you told other family members about this? Not yet. We wanted to better understand the scope of the problem before involving others. But if the investigation reveals that the breach extends beyond your personal communications, we may need to warn other family members. The thought that this crisis might expand to involve other members of the royal family was deeply troubling. She had always been protective of her stepchildren and mindful of her role in supporting the institution of the monarchy. The possibility that her security breach might create problems for others was a burden she was not prepared to bear. What can I do to help with the investigation? Surely there must be some way I can contribute to identifying who is responsible for this. The intelligence services have requested that you provide them with detailed information about anyone who has had access to your private office or personal computer systems over the past year. They'll also want to interview you about any unusual contacts or suspicious incidents you might have noticed. The prospect of being interviewed by intelligence officials about her personal affairs was daunting, but she recognized the necessity. If providing information could help identify the perpetrators and prevent further damage, she was prepared to cooperate fully. As the evening wore on and they continued to discuss the implications of the security breach, Camilla found herself grappling with a range of emotions. The initial hurt and confusion of the morning had given way to anger about the violation of her privacy, fear about the potential consequences, and a deep sense of vulnerability about her future security. But perhaps most troubling was the damage that had been done to her relationship with Charles. His decision to exclude her from knowledge of the investigation had revealed a willingness to prioritize institutional concerns over their personal relationship in ways that fundamentally challenged her understanding of their marriage. 3 days later, Camilla sat in a sterile conference room deep within a government building she had never known existed. Across from her sat Director Sarah Morrison of MI5. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had been leading the investigation into the security breach. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of interviews, technical assessments, and gradually unfolding revelations that had shaken her understanding of her own life.
Your Royal Highness, I want to thank you for your cooperation with this investigation.
I know this has been an extremely difficult time for you, Camilla nodded, still processing everything she had learned. Director Morrison, I need to understand what you've discovered. Charles has given me bits and pieces, but I feel like I'm still missing crucial information. Director Morrison consulted the thick file in front of her. The technical analysis of your private office and computer systems has revealed a sophisticated surveillance operation that was indeed active for approximately 8 months. However, I'm pleased to report that the scope appears to be more limited than we initially feared. Limited how? The surveillance was focused primarily on your electronic communications and conversations within your private office. There's no evidence that other areas of your residence were compromised, and the monitoring appears to have been targeted specifically at your activities, rather than being part of a broader operation against the royal family. While this was somewhat reassuring, it still meant that months of her most private communications and conversations had been monitored. Do you know who was responsible? We believe we've identified the source. It appears to have been orchestrated by Marcus Whitfield, who worked as a maintenance technician for the telecommunications company that services your residence. He had legitimate access to the building's communication infrastructure, which allowed him to install monitoring equipment without detection. The name meant nothing to Camilla, but the revelation that someone with routine access to their home had been spying on her was deeply unsettling. What was his motivation? Financial, primarily. We've discovered that he was selling information to a tabloid newspaper that was planning to publish a series of articles about your private conversations and correspondence. However, we were able to intervene before any information was published. A tabloid newspaper. Of all the possibilities they had considered, from foreign intelligence services to terrorist organizations, the actual culprit had been motivated by nothing more sophisticated than greed and scandal-mongering. What kind of information did he obtain? Director Morrison's expression grew more serious. This is where the situation becomes more complex, ma'am. While the surveillance operation itself was relatively crude, Mr. Whitfield did manage to record and document a significant amount of your personal communications. Camilla felt her stomach tighten. What specifically? Email correspondence with friends and family members, telephone conversations conducted from your private office, and recordings of meetings and personal discussions that took place in that space. The invasion felt complete and devastating. Every private conversation she had valued, every personal communication she had thought was secure, had potentially been compromised. Was any of this information particularly sensitive from a security standpoint? That's what we've been assessing. Most of the communications we've recovered from Mr. Whitfield's files appear to be personal in nature. However, there are several conversations and emails that contain information about royal family schedules, internal discussions about official engagements, and some references to matters that could be considered sensitive. Camilla thought back over the previous months, trying to remember what kinds of conversations might have taken place in her office that could be problematic if made public. There had been discussions about family tensions, concerns about various royal duties, and certainly conversations that would be embarrassing if published in newspapers. Has Mr. Whitfield been arrested? He's currently in custody and has been charged with multiple offenses, including invasion of privacy, theft of personal data, and violations of national security protocols. He's cooperating with the investigation and has provided us with all the material he collected. The knowledge that the perpetrator had been caught provided some satisfaction, but it did little to undo the violation that had already occurred. Director Morrison, I need to ask you directly, is any of this information likely to become public? Are there other copies of these recordings and communications that could surface in the future? We have strong assurance from Mr. Burso Kusadzi, Whitfield, that all the material he collected was turned over to us. The newspaper that was purchasing the information has also cooperated fully and has provided all materials they received. However, I must be honest with you, once information like this exists, there's always some risk that it could surface in the future. The uncertainty was almost worse than the violation itself. The knowledge that somewhere, recordings and documents existed that could potentially embarrass or compromise her would be a constant source of anxiety. What about the newspaper that was planning to publish this information? Will there be any consequences for them? The legal situation is complex. The newspaper's representatives claim they were unaware that the information was obtained illegally, and they ceased all contact with Mr. Whitfield once we alerted them to the investigation. Whether they face charges will depend on prosecutors' assessment of their level of knowledge and culpability. Camilla found herself feeling frustrated by the apparent ease with which media organizations could claim ignorance of clearly questionable sources. So they might face no consequences at all for attempting to profit from illegally obtained private communications? I understand your frustration, ma'am. Unfortunately, the legal framework around these issues is still evolving, and media organizations often have significant protections even when their sources use questionable methods. The conversation continued for another hour as Director Morrison walked her through the technical details of how the surveillance had been conducted and the steps that were being taken to prevent similar breaches in the future. New security protocols would be implemented, all communication systems would be upgraded, and additional background checks would be required for anyone with access to royal residences. But even as she absorbed all this information, Camilla found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened, the ease with which her privacy had been violated, the months during which she had unknowingly been under surveillance, and the potential for her most personal thoughts and conversations to be used against her had fundamentally changed her relationship with her own home and daily life. When the briefing concluded, Charles was waiting for her in the lobby of the government building. They rode back to Clarence House in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the implications of what they had learned. "How are you feeling about everything?" he asked as their car passed through the familiar gates of their residence. "Violated, angry, uncertain about how to move forward." She paused, then added, "And still hurt about how you handled the initial discovery." Charles nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that a great deal over the past few days. I made the wrong choice in following the security service's advice to keep you uninformed. Our marriage has to come before institutional protocols, even in a crisis situation." His acknowledgement was important, but it didn't completely heal the damage that had been done to her trust. "Charles, I need to know that if something like this ever happens again, you'll trust me enough to be honest with me from the beginning. You have my word on that. I've learned that trying to protect you by keeping you ignorant doesn't actually protect you at all." As they entered the residence, Camilla saw Thompson, the guard who had been forced to deny her entry to the private wing just days earlier. He nodded respectfully as she passed, and she could see relief in his expression that the difficult situation had been resolved. The private wing had been cleared by security teams and was now available to her again. Standing at the threshold of her private office, Camilla felt a complex mixture of emotions. This space had been her sanctuary, but now it felt contaminated by the knowledge of what had happened there. "It's going to take time to feel comfortable in here again," she said to Charles, who had followed her to the doorway. "Would you prefer to set up a new private office elsewhere in the residence?" She considered the suggestion, but ultimately rejected it. "No. I won't be driven out of my own space by this, but it's going to take time to trust that my conversations here are truly private." Over the following weeks, Camilla gradually resumed her normal routines and royal duties. The enhanced security measures became part of her daily life, and she slowly regained confidence in the privacy of her communications. But the experience had changed her in fundamental ways. She found herself more cautious about what she said and wrote, more aware of the potential for surveillance, and less trusting of the assumption that her private spaces were truly secure. The knowledge that for months, someone had been listening to her most personal conversations and reading her most intimate correspondence had created a sense of vulnerability that was difficult to shake. The incident also affected her relationship with Charles in ways that extended beyond the immediate crisis. While they had worked through the immediate conflict over his decision to exclude her from knowledge of the investigation, the experience had revealed different approaches to crisis management and different priorities regarding institutional versus personal loyalty that would influence their relationship going forward. Perhaps most significantly, the experience had given Camilla a new appreciation for the complexity of life as a public figure in an age of technological surveillance. The assumption that high-profile individuals could maintain any meaningful privacy had been shattered, and she realized that going forward, she would need to live with the constant awareness that her words and actions might be monitored by those who wished her harm. The investigation eventually revealed that Marcus Whitfield had been motivated primarily by financial gain, having accumulated significant gambling debts that made him vulnerable to recruitment by unscrupulous media organizations. His surveillance operation had been relatively unsophisticated, relying on basic listening devices and computer monitoring software, rather than the advanced techniques that might be used by foreign intelligence services or terrorist organizations. While this made the breach somewhat less alarming from a national security perspective, it also highlighted how easily privacy could be violated by individuals with legitimate access to secure facilities. The incident prompted broader reviews of security protocols throughout the royal household and led to significant changes in how background checks were conducted and how access to sensitive areas was controlled. For Camilla personally, the experience served as a harsh reminder of the price of public life and the constant vigilance required to maintain even basic privacy and security. The morning that had begun with confusion and hurt over being denied access to her private wing had evolved into a comprehensive education about the vulnerabilities and challenges of modern royal life. As months passed and the immediate crisis faded into memory, Camilla found herself stronger and more resilient for having survived the ordeal. The violation of her privacy had been devastating, but her ability to weather the crisis and emerge with her dignity and relationships intact had given her confidence in her ability to handle whatever future challenges might arise. The guard who had been forced to deny her entry that morning eventually became a symbol in her mind of the complex loyalty and duty that defined life within the royal household. Thompson had been required to follow orders that caused her distress, but his discomfort with the situation and his eventual honesty about its unprecedented nature had demonstrated the human cost of institutional decisions. In the end, the crisis had revealed both the vulnerabilities and the strengths that defined her life as a member of the royal family. While she could never again take privacy and security for granted, she had also discovered reserves of resilience and determination that would serve her well in facing whatever challenges the future might bring.